Welcome to Making It with Terry Wollman, the show that explores the secrets, successes, and strategies for making it in the music biz. And now, here's your host, Terry Wollman.
My guest today is artist and musician Jimmy Haslip. I appreciate you joining us every week, and I'd like to share my intention that inspires this podcast. Time passes quickly, and I've learned that we should do what's in our hearts and do it well without apologies or excuses. I encourage you to create your life and art in your own unique way and express your artistry with joy and with abandon. Be willing to work uncompromisingly for what you believe in. Success will have a better chance of finding you when you live your life with integrity, focus, and passion. Be selfish with your discipline and selfless in your performance, and don't forget to have fun along the way. Welcome, Jimmy. Great to see you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm great. As I was saying earlier to you, it's so great to reconnect. You know, it's like one of the cool things about doing this show is having the opportunity to bring on friends, old friends, and also, you know, people that I just respect who are in the creative arts in whatever element. So you're one of those people, and it's just really great to be reconnecting with you. Oh, you're very welcome. So let me tell our audience about you. Producer, composer, bassist Jimmy Haslip was a founding member of the jazz fusion group, the Yellowjackets, and was one of the early innovators of the five-string electric bass. Born in the Bronx to Puerto Rican immigrants, Spanish was Haslip's first language before learning to speak English in kindergarten. His family moved to Huntington, New York when he was 4 years old, and at age 7, he began playing drums, moving on to other instruments before discovering his love for the bass at age 13. In the early 70s, Haslip played with the New York glam band Street Punk and also began gaining experience on the road before moving to Los Angeles in 1976. In addition to his historic collaboration with the Yellowjackets, he has worked with Jeff Lorber, Eric Marienthal, Bruce Hornsby, Rita Coolidge, Gino Vanelli, Kiss, Tommy Bolin, Alan Holdsworth, Marilyn Scott, Shaka Khan, Al Jarreau, Donald Fagen, and Anita Baker. And that is just to name a few. There are so many more. Haslip has also been a vegetarian since 1972 and lives a healthy lifestyle. So we've got some things to talk about on that, some shared perspective and point of view on life. He and his wife, Nancy, have 3 children. And I want to welcome you to the show. Jimmy Haslip, welcome to Making It.
Thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure. And hi, Dr. Lisa. I see you here. Thanks for joining us. So let's start with, I guess, the obvious, so we can sort of address it, and then move on to all the other wonderful things that you've done. But the Yellowjackets, the first time I heard you play was pretty early on in the band in 1981. I think it was it might have been the Roxy, but it was you know, like one of the clubs in Hollywood, and I was really blown away, you know, by what I heard and witnessed live, because the band, it was a great band. I mean, wonderful musicians. I know that you were already friends. Well, you tell the history. I know that you brought Ricky Lawson into the band, but you were also friends with Russell Ferrante and Robben Ford at that time, correct?
Yeah, well, I met Robben when I was working with Ricky on the road. We were touring with Flora Purim and Ayrto, their band. And that's where I met Ricky for the first time. But we had been touring for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And we ended up at the Roxy, and Robben Ford was in the audience. So he approached me after the show. We talked. He was just starting to prepare to make his legitimate first solo record, and invited me to play on the record. So I said, great, yeah, I'd love to do that. So we got together a few times. He was bringing a piano player down from up north, from San Jose, and that was Russ Ferrante. And then looking for a drummer. We actually played with a few other drummers, but eventually I brought in Ricky Lawson, and that stuck.
It gelled. Yeah.
It gelled, and then we ended up doing a bunch of gigs together. And then we went in the studio with Steve Cropper producing, which was really interesting to work with him. Obviously, for those people who don't know who Steve Cropper is, I mean, he's done a ton of stuff, but he's, I guess, well known for playing with Booker T and the MGs, the original guitar player in that band. And then he also wrote In the Midnight Hour with Wilson Pickett. So he's
a legendary guitarist and songwriter.
Right.
How was he as a producer? Did you enjoy that?
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
And he and Robben had a great chemistry together.
Sure.
And he loved the band and he loved the music. It was really different for him because it was bordering on some fusion blues,
right?
And
didn't Steve also co-write "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay"?
I think so. Yeah, he wrote a lot of old R&B tunes that are iconic.
Yeah,
songs.
Well, that must have been really exciting for you for all of you to be a part of that. His first, the first solo album, Robben's first legit solo album, because he was certainly a really seasoned studio musician at that point and live. I mean, just brilliant player. So like a very exciting time energy wise for him to be launching his career and you to get to be a part of that ride.
It was definitely an incredible experience. I'll never forget it. It was the first time I had been in the studio doing sessions before, but this was different because it was like a band project.
Right.
It wasn't just like a sideman. I was part of the group, and it was a collaborative vibe.
Right.
So we made this record. It's called The Inside Story, and I always say it's really the first Yellowjackets record because after that,
yeah, that makes sense.
We did through Robben's manager, who ended up becoming the Yellowjackets manager, a gentleman named Gary Borman. He got us a deal with Warner Brothers doing instrumental music only, and that was with Tommy LaPuma, a legendary producer. Who was also incredible to work with. And we did the first Yellowjackets record in 79, 80, and then we went on tour behind that. I remember that was my first time to the Montreux Jazz Festival, which was really incredible, 1981. And we participated in a kind of a compilation record that Warner Brothers put together with Tommy LaPuma was there with a legendary engineer, producer, Hal Schmidt.
Yeah.
And so we were part of the Warner's group that was appearing at the Montreux Festival that year. And so we were on this record that Warner Brothers put out with Al Jarreau was on it, Randy Crawford, David Sanborn, Larson Featon Band. Marcus Miller was new on the scene, and he was playing with David Sanborn. So I got to meet him. That was awesome.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Yellowjackets were part of that, and Larry Carlton.
Were the Crusaders a part of that at that time?
Not that particular project. Larry was on the bill as a solo artist, and we backed him up. So he just came to the festival, and then Tommy LaPuma worked it out so that Russ Ferrante, Ricky Lawson, and myself were Larry Carlton's house band. Yeah. So that it was just an incredible experience. We were there for like 3 or 4 days doing all that, and the rest is history. I mean, I was in that band for 34 years, and
and also you left not because you were having any kind of a bad experience. You just wanted to have more family time and just broaden your musical net in a sense.
Yes.
But one thing that I think is really beautiful is that you recommended Felix Pastorius, and in a way that was kind of a full circle for you because Jocko was somebody who you had gotten to know a little bit, from what I understand, and had a friendship with.
Yes. For a while, yeah, I took some lessons from him in 1975, and
Mm-hmm.
and of course I followed his word of mouth big band. I was a fan of that, and I was a fan of all his work, really.
Sure.
His work with Pat Metheny
Yeah. And Joni.
and Joni Mitchell, and
Mm-hmm.
of course Weather Report.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, so I met Felix when he was just a little kid. He was,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I think he was only like 6 or 7 years old, if that.
Mm-hmm.
So to later find out that he was this iconic bass player in New York, following in his dad's footsteps.
Sure.
I didn't have a lot to do with getting him into the band.
Okay.
His name came up, and of course, I supported that when I left, and so he was one of the candidates, and
Mm-hmm.
then eventually did get the gig, and he did that for I think a year and a half, 2 years. He did one record with them, and then he left to do some other things, and they found this other young bass player who at the time was living in Virginia, a guy named Dane Alderson,
Mm-hmm.
and he's still in the band, and he's
No
done I
kidding.
think 3 records with them,
Mm-hmm.
um, 3 or 4. I can't. I lost count, but he's incredible, and the band still lives on, and I'm a big fan. So that's
As
how
am
that.
I. Yeah. No, you guys, you set the bar high for instrumental music, and I've always, um, as a fellow instrumental artist, I really appreciate that because it was sort of a mixed bag. There was some really amazing music, and then some kind of mediocre music that would slip in to the mix, and of course, I always gravitated towards the people who were really digging in and writing great melodies and understood the pop structure of bringing that into instrumental music. And I just, was always a fan of the band, and what you all did together was great.
Very kind of you to say. We strived for, as Bob Mintzer would say, we strive for tone, and we
Mhm.
tried to always
Well,
find some music to
sure.
play. Do the best we could, and I think the band has done really well. They're still alive and well. I don't.
Yeah.
At this point, I did 22 records with the band, and there's at least another 8 records, maybe, or 7. So it's a lot of 38 or 39 records now.
Mm.
I'm sorry, 28 or 29 records now. Not counting all the other projects. We did a lot of outside projects,
Mm-hmm.
and fortunately got hired by some pretty interesting people. One in particular, we did a whole record with Bobby McFerrin.
Which one was that?
That was called Bang Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
It was for Blue Note.
Yeah.
Just the band had a lot of different things that were available for us to do. Working with big bands, working with other artists,
Mm-hmm.
and then doing festivals and small clubs. I mean, it was quite an interesting variety of things available to us. So.
Well, your career has been quite an interesting variety. You've correct me if I'm wrong on any of these facts, but you've played on over 450 recordings. You've toured and recorded with over 190 artists, conducted over 1,000 plus master classes and clinics and workshops, but I want to ask you, like, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is that you were one of the early aficionados of the 5-string electric bass. And was that a pretty natural transition for you? Did it feel like it just opened the world up for you, or was it technically a little bit of a challenge, or did you get any flack from any of the producers and they just wanted you to bring the Fender in?
Some guys, some producers thought it was a little overkill, but most embraced,
Yeah.
I guess the change in the
Yeah.
instrument, being able to play some notes that were below the normal range of the instrument. But yeah, it was challenging. And then not long after I played 5-string, I went to 6-string. So that's
Right.
really what I play now. I've been playing since 1988. I've been
Mm-hmm.
playing 6-string bass. But the whole thing, I have to acknowledge a gentleman that turned me on to the whole idea, and that was Jimmy Johnson.
I was just going to guess that, because to me, you and Jimmy, Nathan East later, and not too long after, but you and Jimmy were like really in the front, on the front line of helping define that instrument and using it in a way that was pretty exciting for me as a listener, also as a producer and an artist. It's like I loved In the Right Hands, which was yours and certainly Jimmy's, a real beautiful use of those extra low notes without being in anybody's way. It was sonically incredible to me.
Yeah.
It was great.
Well, I heard Jimmy play with a very interesting, wonderful musician named Claire Fisher,
Yeah.
and that whole night I was listening to the band playing. They sounded incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I kept hearing all these low notes, and I was looking for a pedal or anything.
Right.
But
Right.
there's nothing there. And then I realized he had 5 tuning pegs on his guitar.
Right.
So I immediately talked to him after the gig, and he showed me his Olympic bass,
Mm-hmm.
and then I at the time was being endorsed by Yamaha, so I ran down to Yamaha like the next day or the couple of days later, and I talked to them about building me a 5-string bass, which they did, and I was happy to have the instrument and happy to open the door if I did anything to do that. I'm happy to have done that. So
Can we just talk about the news for just a moment?
Sure.
Just because I know it's on both of our hearts. Just watching one more shooting, one more, technically another mass shooting by somebody who had an assault rifle that shouldn't have. What's on? Do you have anything to say about that? I know we kind of stand in solidarity on this, but even if we don't, do you have anything to say about this?
Well, it's hard for me to wrap my head around all these incidents that
Yeah.
are happening, really, mostly here in the U.S., but there are things happening in countries. Like I just saw a mass shooting in Denmark, of all places, which
Right.
is one of the most peaceful places I've ever visited. So it's hard for me. I grew up with respect to my fellow human being on this planet, and I just don't understand, what is going on, and I don't understand why there's better laws in place to really subdue all the damage that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that in our country, the people responsible to put laws into play to help protect the citizens of our country are just kind of dragging their feet. And it all has to do with probably, as it's been discussed, it all has to do with money and power and all that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's all bullshit.
I do too.
It's really, we're in a horrible place. And I'm thankful that I have music in my life to help me through all this, but
Right.
it's painful.
Yeah. Thanks for speaking on that. Yeah, it's really on my heart today. So let's talk about health. And yeah. uh, before we really get into music, because I want to talk about your early years as a kid and into the present and all the beautiful things you're doing right now. But let's just for a moment just talk about your choices about living a healthy lifestyle, diet wise, exercise wise.
Well, that sort of just fell in my lap. I mean, I think I ate well as a kid growing up in New York, but this whole vegetarian thing happened when I moved to in 1970 71. I left New York and moved to the Bay Area, way up north. I was up in Gurneyville, California for a while, which is about 90 miles north of San Francisco.
And what brought you to that town?
So a guy I played in a band with in high school moved there and opened up a health food restaurant. Um, and always, we stayed in touch. Uh, I graduated high school in 1970, so it was only a year or so after that I got in touch with this guy. His name is Earl Vedrick, and he was a keyboard player that played in a band I was in high school called Square Pegs. Later, it was called Lucifer's Garden, and it was just having fun in high school, playing rock tunes and good cover band, but really fun stuff. So he had always said, if you ever come out this way, you can stay with me. And so I had been playing in a top 40 band for a while. And the scene was just getting boring and, playing 5 shows a night in these kind of pickup bars all over New York and area and New Jersey, Connecticut. And it was just starting to get old, as they say. So I was looking for, at that time, just kind of looking for a change of scenery. And that seemed to make sense. So funny enough, the guitar player in the band that I was playing with, virtuosic guy, and he kind of took me under his wing. He was studying guitar with Pat Martino, and he was sort of giving me lessons too, and it was really great hanging with him. I mentioned that I might be thinking about going to California to visit this friend of mine. He said, I'll come. So I had a friend come along with me, this guy Angelo Ficara, and we got in his Volkswagen and we drove cross country in about 5 days. Ended up in Gurneyville, California, with my friend Earl, and we got free meals and stuff, so it was all vegetarian cuisine. And I found it pretty interesting. I just read a book on fasting and read this Zen diet book. It was you had to start the diet by eating only brown rice and drinking water for 10 days. It's like a real serious fast. I did all that, and it just kind of stuck. I just kept that up over the years. So I've been a vegetarian, so to speak, for since 1971, and I've kind of gone into other territory like vegan diet and
macrobiotic as well.
Even at one point, this was in the late 70s. I experimented with. I read a book by this guy named Dr. Ehret. I think it's spelled Ehert.
Yeah, I remember that. I read him too. I don't remember the name of the book.
It's called a mucusless diet.
Right. I bet you I still have a copy of it.
So
The mucusless diet.
I
Yep.
did that. I did that for about 8 months,
Mm-hmm.
but I started feeling a little strange about it. I didn't feel like I had a lot of energy.
Right.
So I had a friend of a friend who was a nutritionist. You need to add some protein to that. So he prescribed that I, added maybe eggs and even like cheese, if
Mm-hmm.
but minimal amount
Right.
of that, but um, and load up on legumes like beans and stuff like that, and nuts.
Right.
You know, then also added tofu, things like that. Because in the mucusless diet, there was none of that. It
Right.
was
It was
very
yeah. It was one step away from being an Eritrean, and
yes,
which is a real thing too. I remember reading about that, and I went, "That's kind of nuts," you know?
it's a little nutty. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did it for 8 months, and I got way too thin. I mean,
Yeah. I
I'm
would imagine.
6'2", and I think when I finished doing that, I weighed like 160.
Eeh. Yeah.
That's really thin for me,
Yeah.
Uh,
Energetically, like you said, I would imagine you didn't have enough fuel to really drive the bus.
yeah, and I was doing gigs, and I was
Right.
kind of like, like lie down and take a nap. This isn't right. I shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
So I took this advice from this nutritionist. I added eggs. Didn't go crazy with that.
Moderation.
Moderation, and he even said, look look into the back. He knew I had experimented with macrobiotic
Mm-hmm.
diet. Well, macrobiotic includes fish and fowl.
Mm-hmm.
But even when I did the macrobiotic diet, I didn't include fowl. I just ate some fish.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
That's what I've done.
yeah.
Yeah.
And now actually I don't even eat fish
Mm-hmm.
because there's some crazy stuff going on there with that. And
Yeah.
it's very minimal.
Mm-hmm.
Like line caught salmon is
Mm-hmm.
about the bottom line. It's so strict. And but I gravitate between these different diets. They're all pretty similar,
Mm-hmm.
and they all make me feel good, and
Right.
it allows me to, like, say, go on the road where you can't be that strict.
Right. That certainly impacted my diet choices along the way, from moving between vegan and vegetarian or pescatarian
Yeah.
over the years. Yeah. Because
So,
you can only eat so many salads and still be able to get up and do a show.
right.
What was it like?
Maybe having a salmon steak will
Yeah,
help with that.
absolutely. Um, what was it like? Because you're answering part of the question right now, traveling, but also raising kids. Uh, what? I mean, your kids are all grown, all three of them,
Yeah,
but
they're all three grown. Yeah.
diet wise,
I was going to say the two sons that I share with my wife. They're her sons.
mhm,
They're my step boys, and but yeah, they were back and forth between our house and their dad's house.
mhm,
I spent a lot of time with them, and then my daughter. Hey, it's my wife just popped. My daughter, she's 27 now, but that was I took some time off at
mhm,
first when she was born, and then actually when she was 7, she had a grave illness, which made me take time off. So there was like 3 years there where things were on edge, and I was home a lot. In fact,
mhm,
I even worked out a thing with the Yellowjackets where I had kind of a permanent sub for a while because I had just had to be home
mhm.
with my wife to take care of our daughter.
And
So
of course, they were supportive of that.
yeah, they were totally supportive. So
Yeah.
uh, there was a lot of time off from going on the road and spending a lot of time at home,
Hmm.
uh, dealing with a lot of medical stuff for her. So
And she's doing great now.
she's doing very well. We still have stuff to deal with.
Sure.
She she suffered 2 strokes when she was 7 years old. So
Mm.
that was massive, incredible. Hard. It's hard for me to even believe it today.
That must have been so terrifying for you and Nancy.
Yeah,
Mm.
both
And her.
serious family emergency.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for sharing that.
yeah, we've gotten through all that. That she was 7, now she's 27. So
Mhm.
we're thankful that she's here with us, and she's doing pretty well.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about music. 23 Grammy nominations, 3 Grammy wins, a this is not for you. You know all this. This is for the audience in case they don't know. A Latin Grammy nomination, a Dove Award win, 1 Jazz Angel Award win in Poland, an Edison Award nomination, 3 Sammy Award wins. Not to mention the numerous. I'm just going to do a quick read just because I think it's always really interesting. Gino Vanelli, David Sanborn, Layla Hathaway, Rod Stewart, Joe Cocker, Herb Alpert, Shaka Khan, Al Jarreau, Gary Wright. Go fix yourself something to drink. I'm gonna go through this list. Carmen Appice, John Scofield, Crosby, Stills, Nash, Roy Ayers, Ricky Lee Jones, Harvey Mandel, Lee Ritenour, Larry Carlton, Robben Ford, Chuck Loeb, George Harrison, Pat Metheny, George Duke, Jerry Garcia, Diana Ross, Brenda Russell, Robbie Robertson. Okay, I'm not going to go through the whole list because we don't have enough time in the show. But it's really about the versatility. I appreciate, and I would imagine you do too, that you weren't ever pigeonholed as a jazz guy or a whatever guy. It would be easy to do that because you excel and you've done so many things that have been visible, on recordings and touring, but still you have worked, with a lot of people in a lot of different styles. And some of that I think is just relationship based, that
Yeah.
it's, what do you think it is that sort of led to the diversity of your career musically, artistically?
Well, I love music, and growing up, my household was filled with music. Between my parents, we had a live-in aunt who was great. My aunt Irma
Uh-huh.
was terrific, and my older brother, who was 11 years older than me, who used to experiment and bring me into his room and play me like John Coltrane records when I was like 6 years old or 7 years old. And he was already like 17.
Mm-hmm.
And would play me like a Prokofiev concerto or something,
Mm-hmm.
Something challenging. Then he would just kind of watch my reaction. I think he got a kick out of that. But what ended up happening was I was being exposed
Right.
to all this different music.
Mm-hmm.
My parents loved big band music and some adult contemporary stuff. Andy Williams,
Sure.
Robert Goulet.
Sure.
So
Jerry Vale, Johnny Mathis. I know that you've mentioned before. Yeah.
that was my aunt's favorite.
Okay.
So that was in the house. But Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Tito Puente, then a lot of Latin stuff because
Right.
From Puerto Rico, listening to Ray Barretto and Mongo Santa Maria and Celia Cruz, all this stuff was flowing through the house. And then contemporary stuff, Beatles.
Yeah. We grew up in a great time musically.
All kinds of stuff. So I was exposed to quite a wide range of music as a kid. And I think that just kind of, influenced me as a growing musician
Mm-hmm.
to be open to all these different kinds of music, you know. And then, of course, like you mentioned, growing up in the 60s,
Yeah.
that was a renaissance, even with the music we were all listening to.
Oh, it's exquisite. AM radio was just a cornucopia. It was just this wealth of different styles of music.
Exactly. So, you know, you'd be listening to the radio driving around in the car and you'd hear everything from Miles Davis to Joni Mitchell, you know.
Right. And then an 8-minute Inagata Davida drum solo.
And that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe you know, Paul Butterfield Blues Band.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, so it was just fantastic, all that stuff. So
Yeah.
that penetrated my soul for love of my love of music,
Mm-hmm.
and I strived for that, and I've been fortunate to have walked down the path of all these different genres and
Right.
met people and got involved in projects, recording projects and tours and all sorts of things. And I really started out just playing rock music and then understanding blues. And then, you know, also, you know, I even played in groups that played folk music.
Mm-hmm. I did too. Yeah.
When I moved to San Francisco,
Oh,
especially
of course. Right.
the coffee house scene. So I was playing with, you know, folk singers in little coffee houses in San Francisco. So I was exposed to all that, and I embraced it all.
And I would also imagine growing up in a bilingual household, you're used to hearing and basically processing different languages, you know,
Yes.
different sounds, and then studying, of course, drums, but trumpet and tuba and whatever else you were learning along the way
Yeah.
before, stumbling into the bass.
Which was just for fun when I was like 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know, I love sports, and I played a lot of sports all through junior high school, even before junior high school, but in like athletic clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, when I was, you know, like 9, 10 years old, playing in basketball leagues and stuff.
Were you tall back then?
Yeah, I was tall. I was always one of the tallest kids in the class. So you know, that came into play because, of
Mm-hmm.
course, you know, some guy at an athletic club goes, "How old are you?" And I go, "I'm 10," and I was already like probably like 5'11" or something like that, almost 6 feet tall. And they go,
Mm-hmm.
"Come on over here, we're gonna get some of our basketball." You know, I ended up, and I loved playing basketball. I was even the captain of our JV team in high school. Um, and I did play as a sophomore on the varsity team for a while, but I think my varsity coach didn't like me. I don't know why. I won't go into that, but I have an idea what was going on, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up playing in some intramural basketball leagues and just had a ball doing that. So I was, you know, I ran track, I played lacrosse, I
You did? Yeah, I thought you might have. Yeah.
football, I played baseball, I played all the sports. And so with that, I mean, that's quite a social kind of community, you know,
Right.
the athletes. So when I was 13, these guys from the football team said, "Hey, we're putting a band together to play some pool parties this summer break." And he goes, "Well, we don't have a bass player." So play bass. And I said, "Well, okay, let me look into that." So
Mm-hmm.
I think my dad bought me a bass for like $100, and
Right. And you flipped it over being left-handed.
because we couldn't find a lefty bass,
Right.
we bought a righty bass, and I flipped it upside down. And I learned all these songs by ear, like 15 songs or 20 songs, whatever it was. And we would play them, and it was a ball.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like doing this. So I started practicing on my own and learning more tunes. And eventually I got into like one of the coolest bands in high school and playing all the school dances and stuff. And
Essentially self-taught though, right? Still
completely
learning the songs on your own.
until I graduated from high school, and then I thought I need to figure some more stuff out. So I got a teacher
Mm-hmm.
who was a tuba player named Ron Smith, who played with Elvin Jones, and he lived in Huntington, Long Island. I went to high school with his sister.
Perfect.
So he took me on as a student. He taught me a bunch of really cool stuff. He showed me what the whole diatonic system was. He taught me some basic piano, which came
Perfect.
really handy. And he made me study out of trombone books,
Mm-hmm.
which was interesting because it was very melodic,
That's so interesting to hear you say that because you are an extremely melodic bass player. I mean, you certainly know how to lay a groove down, but melody is such a big part of what you integrate into everything that you do.
I hear all that, and I studied all that. And then, didn't hurt that I played trumpet for 11, 12 years
Mm-hmm.
too. So that all that's in my head as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then when somebody asked me, I did an interview this morning with Jazz Is magazine, and they asked me about my relationship to Jocko and what did I learn from him.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, he opened my eyes at one point. This is 1975. And he said, "Man, you got to listen to horn players." I thought, well, that's it, because until then, I was predominantly listening to bass players
Yeah, of course. That's what you
where I live.
right.
But I said, okay, I'm going to start listening to horn players. And then
Mm-hmm.
I started trying to transcribe some of that stuff, like listening to Coltrane. And I'd hear like a line that he played. And I go, oh, wow, that's really cool. And I'd try to learn that. Or Freddie Hubbard,
Mm-hmm.
or, Sonny Stitt or Miles Davis, or, the list goes on. I just went down the list. I listened to everybody, and
Mm-hmm.
I tried to check that out. And then for a while, I just listened to guitar players
Yeah.
that I liked, from like John McLaughlin. And then fortunately, I lived in a house. It was a duplex with Robben Ford, so I was listening to him. He's good.
Yeah, I would say. Well, that makes sense too that you went through that you got to sort of be exposed to that, the osmosis of, through the floor, into or his ceiling and your floor. But you are kind of a guitar player's bass player. You really understand the instrument. Uh, and it seems, would you agree? I mean, or do you feel a connection? I mean, that's clear.
I feel a connection to the guitar, but I just, I always just want to do the best that I can. So if it's just playing one note and locking in with the kick drum, I'm
You're
happy
good with that.
to
Right.
do that. If it's playing a melody with a saxophone, I'm happy to do that. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, some people ask me about things like that, and bottom line is just be prepared to do any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So practice, and that's ingrained in all of our heads. You got to practice your ass off
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
be prepared to do anything that comes up. And I've crashed and burned many times on session. I remember I did a session for a film. Everything was going along just great. And it was for somebody I really respected, a guy named Michel Colombier.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful composer.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so we got a music stand filled with cues.
Yeah.
Right? So cue number 492, cue number 493, everything's going along just great. And then we get to cue 440, and I open that up, and it looks like what they call
Fly
fly.
shit. Yeah.
And I go, whoa, what's this? And so funny enough, it was this song, hold that tiger.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, hold that tiger. Okay. But I had to double the tuba bass line, which was just wall to wall eighth notes from bar to bar.
Mm-hmm.
And that kicked my butt. And I crashed and burned on that. And at one point, I just stopped, because I didn't want to screw up the session.
Mm-hmm.
And Michelle pulled me aside and he said, "When you work for me, you have to be prepared for anything. Don't forget that." He was very cool about it.
So he enabled it to not be a humiliating experience for you.
I was humiliated,
Well,
but he kind of supported me, and he said, what he said, which
yeah,
be prepared for anything. So that was another hard lesson learned.
yeah,
And that was more about being able to read. It was at a pretty quick pace too. I think I ended up just playing some like roots here and there, and the horn section did all the.
yeah, the heavy lifting.
I think there was a bass trombone player,
Mm-hmm.
all those parts. But we got the job done. But I went home that night and I kicked my ass.
Yeah, I would imagine. Well, I don't have to imagine. I've had that experience, and it was for a film date. Same thing.
Yeah, and it's happened to me, more. Hopefully, not as many times. I think I have to be able to count them on two hands, but
Good.
maybe two and a half hands. I don't know.
Well, I think there's something in a way that's I think good for people to hear. That at any level there's always room for growth, and
It is.
and uh, and there's a lot to it. It's very layered. To be a successful anything, obviously, but we're talking about music right now. I have two quotes that I want to read. One is yours, and one is Yogananda that I came across, and then I just want to have you elaborate on this. Your quote is, "Through all that, you're talking about starting playing the electric bass and all the things that you did as a young kid. Through all that, I've combined my music and life experience with my family and my friendships, sports, meditation and metaphysical knowledge, travel and cultural knowledge, and all the ups and downs that come along with these experiences into sharing and giving." And then there's a Yogananda quote that I found in somewhere in looking through, maybe it was on your website, but it says, "Giving love to all, sowing the seeds of wisdom, health, prosperity, and happiness in the garden of my life." What does that mean to you, those words?
That's profound.
It is.
That's in many ways. That's how I feel about what I'm doing here. That's really the main thing, is to give anything I have knowledge wise, to share that with other people and to help other people in any way that I possibly can. Um, be helpful and generous and loving to my fellow man.
Hmm.
That's why I'm here. But the vehicle that I mainly have at my fingertips, no pun intended, is music. So that's a big part of projecting that with that sort of emotion.
And it's a daily practice and opportunity for you, especially because you're pretty busy.
Yes,
You,
yeah,
you,
I picked up with music. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you're, as a producer, composer,
Mhm.
artist, performer.
All of that, and even as a student of music.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Has it ever, with the exception of you stepping aside to be with your family, has it ever been slow for you? Have you ever like hit the doldrums in your career as a musician?
Not really. No, I
Good.
feel I feel connected, and I feel like, I mean, that can always improve. It ebbs and flows. I mean, there's
Sure.
times where I'm so consumed with what I'm doing that family kind of takes a back seat, and that's not good. But it happens, and my family hopefully is forgiving of that.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be, and I try to make amends somewhere else, or
Right.
some other time. But it's worked out, and I have I think a really solid and wonderful relationship with my kids and my wife. You know, with my wife and I, we've been basically we went through you know hellfire with my daughter's illness, and
Yeah.
that alone, just getting through that was really hard, and it's created some issues with us, as people, to have to go through that as parents. But I believe it's only made us stronger. I feel that way myself. Made me a stronger person.
Mm-hmm.
Made me realize, even in a more focused fashion, why I'm here and what I need to do.
Right. Your purpose.
While I'm here, as long as I'm here.
Mm-hmm. I want to take a moment to ask Dr. Lisa if you, Lisa, or any of our audience members have any questions or comments for Jimmy.
Well, I am
I see-
looking down here right now to see if I see any hands up.
Okay.
So
I see a few
keeping my eye
musicians
out.
in the audience
I
too.
think so. So if anyone wants to you have a question or a comment, the circle down in the lower left has some bars in it. Click that and you can request to speak, and I will grab you and throw you on the audience. And look at that right there. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Welcome to the show.
Well, good afternoon from San Francisco. Thank you so much. Great interview, and pleasure and honor to meet you, Jimmy.
My pleasure.
I have to say, first of all, Wikipedia's got it all wrong. There is no way you're a 70. There is no way.
That's an unfortunate truth as far as numbers are concerned, but I don't really feel 70, to be honest.
No, there's no way. That is totally wrong. It's got to be at least 45 or 50. I'm sorry.
Well, that's very kind of you.
Those vegan dishes have been good to you.
Yeah, I mean, healthy lifestyle is not underrated. Exercise, meditation, all the things, Jimmy, that you've been talking about, clearly are working for you.
True. Chris, did you have a question for Jimmy?
Most certainly. What did you do on Star Trek, the movie?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that in the IMDb. I'm quite interested in that, and I'll go back to the audience. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Well, that was thanks for the question. Yeah, and that was an opportunity that came through our office at the time with the Yellowjackets, and our manager called me and Russell Ferrante up and said, "Hey, I just heard from Leonard Nimoy, and they're looking for some contemporary music for this new film, new Star Trek film. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Hell yeah."
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, where do I sign? So we got hooked up, and they brought us, they've got us together. We actually went to the Paramount lot and had lunch with Leonard Nimoy, and the main composer of the score, who was also a very interesting fellow named Leonard Rosenman. And Leonard Rosenman, I came to find out, wrote all the music for a TV series that I grew up with as a kid, which starred a guy named Vic Morrow. It was a show called Combat. And saw that. I said, wow, I get to work next to a guy that wrote the music for Combat. So that was kind of interesting. But the meeting went well. We had a nice lunch, and then we were hired. So Russell and I wrote 2 pieces of music, and we recorded the 2 pieces at a really neat place. I had worked at this place doing a rock and roll record. It was called American Studios in Calabasas, and it was owned by a guy named Richard Podler, who I became friends with. Richard Podler produced all the Three Dog Night records.
Mm.
So he gave us a deal for some studio time. We went in there, we recorded the 2 songs, and they definitely used one piece predominantly. See, in that movie, there's some sort of relationship with whales.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
I remember that.
It's an alien ship. I don't want to get too crazy about this, but there's an alien ship that's hovering around the Earth, and if they don't communicate with the whales, they'll destroy the Earth. So the Star Trek crew went back in time to kidnap 2 whales to bring, because there was no more whales. Whales were extinct. So they found 2 whales and brought them back to the current time to be able to communicate with this alien ship so that the alien ship would then go away in a peaceful manner.
So did you end up being asked to go back to listen to the songs of the whales or any of the...
We did. We requested that.
You did. Yeah. It's a smart move.
More specifically, Russell Ferrante said, "Can we hear what the
whales
is?" Yeah.
Yeah. Hear their language. And they tell stories, whales. I mean, you know that, but there's song cycles that they sing.
So there was a theme. There was like a Baroque round or some kind of thing that Russell latched onto. It was actually the theme that Leonard Rosenman wrote for the Whales. And Russell liked that piece, and we thought, okay, let's mess with that. So we added some like Latin percussion and came up with a little interesting version of that piece. Which then made us co-writers with Leonard Rosenman because he was the originator of the idea. And that was a song called Ballad of the Whale, which ended up getting a ton of airplay on radio. And then the other piece which was used a lot, was when they, excuse me, originally were blasted back in time, and they landed in San Francisco. So I wrote this piece called Market Street, and that piece was played when they first appear back in time in the 80s, 1980s.
That's so great. Now I need to go back and watch the movie again.
It's in there. And they've released a Star Trek 4 soundtrack record that those 2 songs appeared on.
Did you always know that you were a writer as well? Is that something? Did you need to be nudged into that, or have you just always? Well, like you said, you hear melodies and you're playing, so it seems like it would be an easy expression of what you do. But you have a lot of songwriting credits.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I have over 500 songs published at this time. But
that's about $25 on Spotify streaming then, right?
Yeah, at least. I can go out and get some Impossible Burgers.
Right.
So I think in the mid-'70s I got interested in trying to write some music. I was in this band called Adventure when I first moved here to Los Angeles with this guitar player named Phil Brown and Carmine Appice's younger brother, Vinny Appice, on drums. And so I started writing some tunes with Phil, and that was the vibe on that was kind of a New Orleans thing because we had been living in New Orleans. So had some like second line kind of stuff. And we were big fans of Little Feat.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where it was going. And from that, I just started trying to write. I bought a couple of keyboards and I started trying to write songs. And, one of the tracks I sent you, Marilyn Scott, I met Marilyn around that time.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
I wrote 2 songs with her that I was working on that she liked, and she wrote lyrics to them. And the next thing that she had on her agenda to do was she was making a record for Polygram Records, and it was going to be produced by Michael Cimbello. And we played those songs for Michael, and he loved them, and they ended up on that record. It was a Marilyn Scott record called Without Warning.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first real big taste of having songs on a record. You know, that was produced.
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it was. That was 1979, 1980, and also at that time I started working on instrumental music. So by the time the Yellowjackets started in 79, 80, I had a couple of things to throw onto the desk for that, which I ended up having a couple of songs on that first Yellowjackets record. Yeah. And that sort of started the wheels going.
This would be a good time for people to know where they can find your music. And Dr. Lisa can put your website up on the crawl.
It's down there.
Thank you.
Yes,
You always go ahead,
make sure
Lisa.
they go to jimmyhaslipbass.com, not jimmyhaslip.com.
And
we don't have time to tell the reasons why. Just trust us on that.
Well, the website is under construction too, so it needs to be updated. So probably a good place is to if you can, visit me on Facebook or even Instagram has a little bit of stuff there. I'm trying to catch up with that, but
what is it on? Is it at Instagram at Jimmy Haslip?
No, it's actually I think it's Red Heat.
Oh,
which was one of my solo records, and that's the reason I got an Instagram account. But there's a few things on there, but my Facebook page has got the most stuff.
Okay.
I'm on there a lot, and I post everything I'm producing and playing on there to help the cause, you know.
So Red Heat was, I believe you put out in 2000. Previous to that, your GRP record was called Arc. I believe that's your first solo album. And then you've got Trio Loco Medley.
Oh, well, that was a collaborative project with guitarist Jeff Richmond and a drummer Danny Gottlieb.
Got it.
That was just a collaboration. Well, my bona fide solo records are Arc, which was a GRP release, and then Red Heat, which I co-produced with Joe Vanelli, Gino Vanelli's older brother, and then we did a follow-up record to that called Nightfall. So those are the three bona fide solo records. I should mention too that the first record I did, Arc, which is on GRP, that was co-produced with Vince Mendoza, a really fine composer and musician, and I was fortunate to work with him on that. Has a lot of really cool people on there, like John Schofield and Randy Brecker and Joshua Redman, Lenny Pickett. So
Also.
And Peter Erskine played drums on the whole record.
So you have a lot of history with Peter. You guys go back.
Yeah, we do. He was actually in the Yellowjackets for a year.
I remember that.
Yeah. It was undocumented with a recording, but he toured with us for a solid year. And that was fantastic.
I'm sure. Yeah. Can I ask you, before we get to our closing questions, just about a couple of, to me, maybe not obscure, but unique album credits, and just real brief, what you did on that, or what you remember, more importantly, what do you remember about the experience? One is the furthest back that I could find in your credits was 1977 CSN, Crosby, Stills and Nash. How did that come about, or what's your takeaway from that experience?
Well, that was incredible.
Of course.
There's some things I won't talk about.
That's fine.
But it was incredible to meet them. I was a fan of Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Yeah.
And later also Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. But that was a really odd kind of thing. I was on tour with a guitar player named Tommy Bolin, who came out of Well, he's originally from Iowa. He's from Sioux City, Iowa. But when I found out about him years before I worked with him, he was playing guitar in a band called Zephyr. It was
Mm-hmm.
out of Colorado, and I was a big fan of that group. But I think they just did a couple of records, and then he ended up replacing Joe Walsh in the James Gang. And then I was familiar with that. And then I know after that he joined Deep Purple. And he took,
Right. Definitely remember him from that.
but he also did some solo records, and then a friend of mine was playing with them, and at the time the bass player left the band, and my friend was this guy Mark Stein, who was the original lead singer and organist with a band called the Vanilla Fudge. And I had done some recording with him, and he and I'd done some recording with the drummer in the Vanilla Fudge, Carmine Appice. So I became friends with both of them, and I also knew Tim Bogert, who was the bass.
Of course.
But Mark called me and asked me if I wanted to audition for this Tommy Bolin gig, and I said, yeah, sure. And so I went from playing a little bar gig here in Venice Beach, got the gig with Tommy, and then the first gig was at Mile High Stadium, opening for Peter Frampton. That was
like you do, right?
So I toured with Tommy for on and off for a few months, and then Tommy passed away on the road. That was tragic and horrifying. So I ended up being a pallbearer at Tommy's funeral in Sioux City, Iowa. And they had like a like a little service after the actual funeral where they had food and people could just congregate, family and friends.
Sure.
So I ended up there, and I definitely wasn't hungry. It was really sad. So I was just kind of sitting off to a corner with a cup of coffee, and this guy walked up to me and he said, "Hey, you don't know me, but you're the bass player that was in Tommy's band, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Give me your phone number." I thought that was pretty wild. And he said, "I think I have a session for you." And I went, "Wow, okay." So I gave him my phone number, and then that was that. And I did see at the funeral that Joe Walsh was there, but I didn't really speak to him.
You didn't know Joe at the time.
Yeah. I respect everyone's privacy.
Absolutely.
Space, So, so I went home, and about 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from this guy, and I picked up, and he goes, "Jimmy," and I said, "Yeah." He says, "I have a session for you. It's at the record plant. Can you come down? It's just one day. Come down, bring your bass, and we'll work it out." And I said, "Who's this with?" And he goes, "Well, you'll find out when you get here. I'll meet you at the door." I said, "Okay." So I get down to the record plant, and sure enough, this guy's there. And he said, "Okay, so this is for Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And I got your number from Joe Vitale, who you met at Tommy's funeral."
Oh, that was Joe? Wow.
Well, I'd never seen in person. So.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of having Joe on the show. And sweet guy.
Oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah, I really love him.
So he was responsible. I guess they had they needed a bass player for this one day.
Right.
So I walked in, and predominantly I recorded with just Joe and Graham Nash. David wasn't there, and Steve was preoccupied. Steve Stills.
Sure.
So I recorded like 2 or 3 things with those guys, and they made me fill out all the paperwork and stuff. And then that was that.
Do you remember which songs?
It was a song I think called "Carried Away."
Beautiful.
Gosh,
that's okay.
I really remember. There was a few other songs, maybe Dark Star song. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that ended up on another record.
Yeah. A later record.
Yeah.
That's quite a story.
Yeah. So I went home and then, I didn't think much of it, but I thought, how cool was that? And I ended up on this. The first thing I ended up on was this reunion CSN record because they had been broken apart. This was a bona fide reunion record, and I ended up on that record. So they paid me, and that was that. I had hoped that maybe I could have gotten a shot to do some road work with them, but they had a guy that I think was kind of like iconic with the band. This guy, Chocolate Perry.
Yeah. Yeah.
From Miami.
Yeah, they knew him from Miami. I grew up in Miami, so I remembered, seeing him play in clubs with like anybody big, and then and he was their bass player, and Criteria was down there, and
he also recorded with Bobby Caldwell.
Oh, he did.
I later played with Bobby Caldwell and stuff. So.
Let me ask you two other quick ones, and then we'll get to our closing questions. If you get another couple minutes, you good? One is Eva Cassidy. Here's a star whose light burned brightly and went out quickly. But how did you know her before her record?
I didn't know her at all. A guy that was doing some co-production and engineering for the project. This was for a live record. And for some reason on this one tune, the bass mic or whatever they had got all screwed up. And there was no way to get in touch with the bass player. I don't know where he was or who he was even really. But I got a call from the engineer saying, can you come down to Sunset Sound and we need you to replace this bass part. The mic got screwed up and all that. I said, yeah, sure. So I didn't know who it was for or anything. I just went down there. He said, this is this woman, Eva Cassidy. And I didn't know much about her until then. Found out, I read more about her and I understood what that was all about. And so also on the session was Mike Finnegan.
No kidding.
The organ mic went out too on this one song. So Mike Finnegan and I played to this track and we replaced.
You were both replacing technical errors from the previous session. Man, the randomness of life can be pretty beautiful.
Yeah, it can be. And I count my blessings every day for stuff like that, where just things come out of the clear blue sky and I get a call and all of a sudden I'm working. This also happened to me with Selena.
Oh, it did?
Yeah. Right before she was, I guess, she was murdered.
By a fan, I believe.
Right before, and this was her first record in English. Record called Dreaming of You. And I played on the title track. So I got a call from the producer. He just needed a bass on this. This is out of the blue. I went down there. I put a bass on this song, and then I think literally 2 weeks later, I'm watching TV, and they televised this horrible incident that happened. And then I read more about her, and I was just really sad to hear about that. She had a beautiful voice. She was a beautiful young gal, came from a really nice family, and but there you go. So
one more. In 1981, you made a record with Ron Wood.
Yes, that was incredible.
Yeah, of course. How could it not be?
Whole thing that fell completely in my lap, and it's all because I knew the guy that was producing it, Andy Johns, who was an iconic engineer, worked with Led Zeppelin. I had done some stuff with him with Rod Stewart and even a few other things. But he called me to play on this, so I ended up walking into this room. It was a makeshift studio in a 4-car garage, and Mandeville Canyon.
Oh.
And there was Ronnie Wood, Ian McLaglen on organ, who was the organist in Small Faces. Nicky Hopkins on piano, who's iconic British piano player, played with the Rolling Stones and many, many others. And of course, a very famous drummer.
Was it Charlie Watts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which, again, another sad note, we lost him just recently, and I was really sad to hear that news. He was just an incredible person, a gentleman, maybe the epitome of an English gentleman, along with Nicky Hopkins also.
As well.
And I spent most of the time during those sessions with Nicky, because Nicky was on the wagon, and the other guys were not.
We're not. Right.
And I was a strict vegan at the time. So I was showing up to the sessions with my fresh squeezed orange juice and some trail mix and, some fruit.
Yeah.
And they looked at me kind of curious as to what I was doing. What is
I would
this?
imagine.
But I had Andy Johns in my corner, brought me into the whole fold. And I did my job. I love rock and roll. I love those guys. I mean, how could you not love what they do? So I tried to just blend in with that whole group of guys. A few times some guest guys came by to just say hello, Jim Keltner, and Bobby Womack came by.
He was a quite he'd fill up a room when he'd walk in the room, Bobby.
Most definitely. And
big energy.
He ended up playing tambourine on something. So it was unbelievable, and I'll never forget it. And I'm proud to have been chosen to work with those guys on this record. And it's an obscure Ronnie Wood record.
Yeah.
But there's some cool stuff on there, reminiscent of that, English Rolling Stones kind of rock and music. So
you've had some magnificent experiences in your life, musically and personally.
I have to admit to that. Yeah. And I'm just always humbled by it all, but accepting, tenfold to experience it. If the door opens up and there's quite an interesting session there, I'm ready to just do anything that needs to be done to make music and to help the project. So,
right. You serve the song. You understand. You understand the job. And what to do with your gift and skill set, which is to serve the music, to serve the artist.
That's the bottom line.
To serve the melody.
I don't care how many chops you have. It's good to have chops. And for those who don't know much about what chops are about, it's the skill, the heightened virtuosity of playing an instrument. It's good to have that, and I work on that. But it's not always necessary to use that. In that case, with Ronnie Wood and those guys, I just needed to just plow through some rock and roll. I didn't need to play anything fancy and nothing exotic. Just down home. Throw down the groove.
Make feel good.
I got to hang with Charlie Watts. It was kick drum and what he was doing, and locked into that, and that made me a happy camper for 5 days.
I had the privilege of playing with Ginger Baker one time on a TV show, and it was for me a very similar experience. There's like nothing like that feel.
No.
Nobody plays like Charlie Watts, but Charlie Watts.
And nobody played like Ginger Baker.
Yeah. It's so perfectly unique, and in all its sloppiness and greasiness and precision. It's just fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is something about that too. Like imperfection creates a uniqueness.
Yes, doesn't it? Yeah.
I'll tell you a really quick story.
Sure.
I'll try to make it fast, but
No, please.
I was doing a jingle session for Mexican television.
Telemundo.
Yeah, something like that. And so the producer knew me and was a fan of the Yellowjackets, so he would hire me and Tom Breckline.
Oh, love Tommy.
So there we were doing this session, and we cut these tracks, and they brought in a horn section to play on it because it was kind of mariachi, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the guys they hired to come in were all the top-notch LA studio players.
I know where you're going with this.
They're listening. I'm just sitting in the control room, and they're listening to it, and they go, something doesn't sound right, And they were playing everything perfectly, in tune, all that stuff, but it just wasn't right. Something was wrong. So the producer said, I know what it is. So he went out in the room. He dismissed the horn section, paid everybody. He went down the street to a Mexican restaurant where there was a mariachi band, and he grabbed all the horn players from the mariachi band, put them in his car, drove them to the session. They got in there. They were there with the sombreros and everything.
Yeah.
They played the parts, all out of tune, maybe sloppy as hell.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's perfect.
It was
right.
perfect. It was the right vibe.
There's a huge lesson in that, because playing sharp or playing not quite in the pocket is sometimes exactly what's needed for the authenticity, for the heart, the corazon of the piece, right?
That was it. They hit the nail on the head, because that was the picture. They did that day in and day out, played just like that, and it was absolutely perfect.
That's a great story.
It made the whole track.
I can imagine. Yeah. Hey, Lisa, before I ask Jimmy my closing questions, is there anything you'd like to ask or jump in on?
I actually do have a quick question. So the year hiatus that you thought was going to be a year hiatus in 2012, at what point did you know, I'm not going back? I'm just going to keep this going.
It was actually that was also part of the hiatus. It was kind of like a separation, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Just for me to figure some things out. And also, they knew where it was going. And they were all cool with it, and so was I, really, on many levels. Mm-hmm. Management was not cool. They were calling me constantly, going, "Okay, you ready to go back?" And I'm
right?
Like, no, not yet. But at the time, I had been solicited to. It's funny how things work. I mean, as soon as I sat down with the guys in the band, we were in Spain somewhere. And I had this discussion with them at lunch, and I told them what my intentions were, and it didn't go over great, but they understood. We're all adults, and I've Russell for at that time for like 35 years. So, and I told him first.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled him aside, told him first. And then we gathered for lunch with William Kennedy, and who had just gotten back in the band after being gone for 10 years. And we did a record. We did this record called Timeline. That was my last record with the band. But Bob Mintzer was there. So then after I told Russell, then I also told Russell was with me, but I told William and Bob at lunch what I was intending. It wasn't, and I said, look, it's not easy for me to sit here and do this.
Of course not.
I've had a lot invested in this project, and so I think now it's safe to say that really that was the intention. And the reason why it was announced as a hiatus was because there were already like gigs booked by booking agents,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't really want to upset the apple cart to that extent where everyone got nervous and even like, didn't go through with the gigs or whatever, because we
Right.
had everything covered. Um, I was going to finish basically all the gigs on the book anyway, and then this was in 2011, and then if there was some kind of a schedule rub somewhere, there was several other guys that were already had played with the band. Like I mentioned to you before, when my daughter got sick, that there was a guy that came in and took over for me for quite a while my daughter was going through this health issue. So there was guy, and Jimmy Johnson actually subbed for me on
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah. Yeah, he did. And that was the brunt of a joke too. We said if anybody subs for me, they have to be named Jimmy. And I knew a whole bunch of bass players named Jimmy. And
Oh, perfect. Right.
Jimmy Earl and
Yeah, Jimmy.
Jimmy Johnson. So I said, okay, we can make that happen.
Yeah, you can make that work.
So
Too funny.
yeah. So anyway, we kind of knew that it was definitely a done deal at that point, but just to make the transition a little easier to swallow for other parties like booking agents and record company people and all that, we made it a hiatus. Make it kind of simple and easy, but you know that's how it went, and of course management talked to me for quite a while about staying, but by then I had already committed to a dozen production projects, so pretty full plate,
Right.
just staying home working on all this production stuff.
Which you're still doing. I mean, you were doing that earlier today
Well,
and yesterday.
since I left the Yellowjackets in 2012, technically, every year, starting in 2012, I've produced anywhere from 8 to 12 records a year. So it's just
Wow.
That's a huge commitment.
and already I've released this year. We released five, six records I've produced, and then there's another 5 records I'm producing right now. And
Right.
there's
You just you produced a Mike Miller record, Marilyn Scott. You worked with Jeff Lorber again on another album with Jeff.
yeah, and then there's the Archaeology record, which is a big band with John DeVersa and Scott Kinsey, and then there's this Randall Clark record is a saxophonist from Salt Lake City, Utah, is with Jeff Lorber. That's coming out this month. And then there's this little trio project I did. It was kind of like an ECM trio with Barry Coates, someone named Jerry Califf. And I sent you a track from that. That's the
great
single. It's called Swing Set.
Yeah. I loved it. Everybody needs to keep their ear out for all 3 of these projects.
Yeah.
The new ones that are coming out, they're great.
Marilyn Scott. Yeah.
Yeah.
That came out in May. That's called The Landscape. That's really a fun project. And then there was this saxophonist from Long Beach, California that I did an EP for, and it's called Long Beach. And his name is Brian Grace, and it features Mike Miller on guitar and Chad Wackerman on drums. And a trumpet player named Ann Howder. She's a really good trumpet player.
She's local?
Yeah, she lives here in town. She's great. I've used her on a bunch of things, and that record's kind of like almost like a Zappa type of, like almost like was it Grand Wazoo? Was that
Mhm.
a big band record?
Right.
Yeah, something along those lines. But Zappa was a genius. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Jimmy, you're set up at home? You've got a full production studio or just basic?
No, I work at different studios in
Mhm.
town, and I have a little rig here that I can do bass overdub.
Right, which you're one of many who got better at that during the COVID pandemic.
Much better, yeah.
Right.
In March of 2020, I was making all kinds of terrible mistakes. But by the end of that year, I was pretty proficient at recording the bass, and now I've even gotten pretty good at editing, and I do edits, and I do play keyboards, so I add keyboard overdubs to things. I can do that all here in my house. But if I have to record drums, most of it's virtual, but sometimes I end up in a room with just like a drummer and an engineer. I'll do that.
Right, because it feels good. It's still connected. It feels live. Yeah, absolutely. So let me get to my closing questions.
Okay.
And I could go all day with you and do this again. This is such a blast to hang out with you, Jimmy. My first question that I ask all of my guests is, since this show's called Making It, what does making it mean to you both personally and professionally?
Well, for me, it's helping people in really exponential ways, and finding ways to help people. So that's why I took these. They're not really bona fide A&R positions, but I'm like an external A&R rep for two labels right now. But I'm doing it just because I want to help people that are having difficulty getting records out. One probably big example is there's this cool record out now. It's called Signs of Life. But it's this singer, saxophonist, keyboard player who's in a group in Venezuela called Guaco, and I'm a fan of the group. But he's a really interesting experimental musician, and he made this record called Signs of Life, and he's in Caracas, Venezuela, and it's really rough there. It's run by a dictatorship. It's not a pleasant place to be. But he's got a connection with Miami and an engineer there named Hernan Landeta. And they made this beautiful record, and they had no place at the time to take it to. And Steve Kahn, who's a friend of mine, played on a couple of tracks and played me the record. And I was so enamored with the record, I asked permission if I could submit it to one of these two labels. And they said, yeah, if you can do that, it'd be great. I got it released on Blue Canoe. They're out of Las Vegas. I've been working with them for 4.5 years. The CEO is a bass player. His name is Joseph Patrick Moore. He's an incredible human being. We've become really close friends.
That's everything right there, what you just said. He's an incredible human being.
Yeah. And so I think when I first hooked up with him 4 years ago, he had about 30 artists on the label. And since I've been working with him, he now has 84 artists on the label. So I brought him a lot of cool stuff, I think. And it's great working with him. And then I just about 1.5 years or so ago started working with this company called Outside In Music. They're out of New York. And I brought an Oz Noy record there. This New Dreams record, which I mentioned with Barry Coates and Jerry Kaloff, that record is coming out on Outside In Music. And I've brought them a couple of more things that they're looking at now. It's a Japanese piano player who's a student at Northridge College, music major, very talented. a lot of these people, there's no real industry now for this kind of music. So I've gotten myself to a place where I'm connected to some labels. I have some good contacts with people. I'm learning stuff every day about music production and post production, which is so very important. I'm in touch with graphic designers. I'm in touch with independent promotion people all around the planet, and I'm just building a little web of connections of people that can maybe help people that have a record. They don't have a place to take it, so I think music can be the healing factor for everything that's going wrong right now, but that's probably maybe not my lifetime. But I'm going to strive to move that needle forward.
I stand with you on that. Absolutely. We can begin to make the change or move it forward with music.
That's right. That's a saying, pass it forward, right?
Pass it forward. Yeah.
That's what I'm here for.
My next question is, can you share 3 tips for success that have driven your career?
Oh, you know, I don't really have a recipe for anything like that, but I know that someone told me once, you must have had great parents, because you get along with people.
I was thinking that.
Yeah, and I did.
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit to that. My parents were unbelievable. So they I think, instilled this quality that I possess of getting along with people and trying to make things work. And being kind to people, that's a big thing. Being a team player, that's also a good element. And also, being knowledgeable and happy to share the knowledge and to help in that sense with moving things forward in a positive fashion. So any of those things I think will help. Yeah, and other than that, I mean, I just try to be myself. I don't bullshit, and I don't believe in lying or being jive or anything. I just say what the truth, to be truthful about everything, and keep everything on the table so there's no mystery about what's going on. I try to shed light on anything that somebody I'm working with might have questions about. So I try to be knowledgeable about all that stuff so that if there is a question, I can give a direct, solid, positive answer to alleviate any concerns or any feelings of insecurity.
Mm-hmm. Great tips. And, that's for having a good life, not just having a good career.
Yeah.
All those things that you just said. My final question, and then I'll give you closing thoughts, is at this point of your life with everything that you know to be true, what would you tell your younger self?
Gosh, I don't know. I always had a pretty intense work ethic. That's important. And all these qualities I just mentioned, they've always been there. They've been in my family. So that's where I learned a lot of it, or at least absorbed all that. It wasn't even like I was sat down in a chair and go, now look, you got to do this. I just learned that from living a daily life with my family and seeing how they reacted to things and how they did things. Now, I also saw how other people who didn't follow those rules acted and created negativity and ill feeling. And I knew right away, I'm not doing that.
Right.
I'm steering away from all that. I don't know. I as far as saying anything to my younger self, I don't know. Maybe stay. One thing I might have said is stay in college. I don't know. I did, which I didn't do. I left college after one semester, but in a way that seemed to work with my life. You know, how I live my life. At first, I think my parents were disappointed in that, but they saw how passionate I was about music and what I was doing, so they let it ride. My dad at one point asked me about any contingency plans, and I sort of made one up, but I thought to myself, if it came down to that, this contingency plan, I wouldn't have a problem following through with it. So therefore, it wasn't a lie. And that was, I told him, if this didn't work out, I was going to go to chef school.
I was actually going to make a joke about you were going to go work at your friend's health food restaurant in Northern California, but you would go to chef school.
Yeah, like go to Paris and learn how to be a chef, That was always something that was interesting to me. And then, of course, being a vegetarian in the early 70s, that was kind of an unknown factor. So I had to read a lot of cookbooks and journals about how to prepare certain foods, how to use certain spices and all that kind of stuff. So I already had kind of a foundation for wanting to know more about that. You know?
Well, I say so far so good.
Well, hanging in there.
Seems to be working out, Jimmy.
Yeah. And I just try to do my best every day.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for your time. It's really been an absolute pleasure. Is there anything you want to close with?
No, just let's. I'm hopeful that things are going to get turned around here. That worldwide with all the issues that are on the table, and I'm going to try to help in some way.
Yeah.
And I suggest to anybody out there that can help make the world a better place to live, do so.
In any way you can. In every way that you can.
Especially for our kids.
Yeah.
And their kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's my thought for tonight.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Jimmy, it's really been a blast and a great pleasure. I want to thank our live virtual audience for joining this conversation, for everybody that's listening. We hear you and we see you. And to everybody who listens every week, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Dr. Lisa, thank you again for joining us.
Great to be here.
And Jimmy Haslip, man, you're the best. Thank you for sharing some time.
Thanks for having me. And we'll stay in touch, okay?
Yeah, I look forward to it. I absolutely do. Time to make some music together and heal the world.
Let's do that.
I'm already thinking about it. We'll just find. I'm in. The answer is yes. So yes, let's do that. Everybody, stay safe, stay inspired, and we'll see y'all next week. Thank you for joining us.
Tune in again next week for another great episode of Making It with Terry Wollman.